Good morning. It is Sunday, the 1st of October, 2023, a beautiful day. I'm Dava Money, and I'm going to be speaking about Buddhism and its relationship to unity. So, unity is a positive, practical faith of radical self-responsibility. What does that mean? Let's unpack it a bit. Practical, meaning that spirituality is a moment by moment, day by day experience. And in order to have our fullest experience, it may be useful for us to develop some disciplines, some practices. So I invite everyone in this moment to consider, what are your practices? It can be something as simple as getting out in nature and noticing the liveliness of it. It can be something as straightforward as prayer, which can be done so very many different ways. It can be something like meditation. It can be something like the practice of gratitude, the cultivation of compassion. So in this moment, you may just want to consider your own practices with a sense of gratitude. Positive. What does positive mean? I think we all know that it is seeing the best in something. It is actually seeing and experiencing divine order, even when that's difficult. When our world is chaotic and it seems divisive, it's easy to get caught up in that. And yet, throughout everything is the blessed presence. So where and how do we experience divine order? I think there's a choice in that. So a faith of radical self-responsibility. What does radical mean? To me, at times, it means leading edge, stepping out of what is conventional, self-responsibility. That is a big one for unity. The recognition that we each have the opportunity to develop our spirituality, the opportunity to experience transformation, not necessarily in just a one-time big way, but breath by breath, day by day, with our insight, with our choices, with our abilities, our God-given abilities. One of the things that helps me in that area is to remember we are part of the whole. So I can't dismiss this over here or that over there, even if it's not to my liking. It's all a part of this life. It doesn't mean I have to get caught up in it. Perhaps it just means, in my small way of blessing it, I see you. May all be well. So one of the things that I really admire about our founder, Charles Fillmore, is that he intensely studied the faiths of the world. As we know, he grew up on a Native American reservation, so he was very aware of those traditions. He was very aware of Eastern traditions. So one of my fascinations for many years has been Buddhism. And as some of you know, I have been ordained as a mindfulness practitioner by An Hung Wen. who was a follower, a disciple of Thich Nhat Hanh's. She came over from Vietnam with Thich Nhat Hanh. She visited Vietnam the last few years of his life with him, and she translated some of his early books. So she is this very tiny, precious woman who has been practicing mindfulness for many decades and has such a powerful presence. When I went through ordination, she did it all in Sanskrit, and there were probably 6 or 7 of us. And she's tiny and she has such a quiet voice that I used to say, could you please speak up during class, during Sangha, during Dharma? But in this ceremony, the voice that came out of her was huge. She sang in Sanskrit. And then toward the end of the ceremony, she touched each of us individually and did a transmission of energy from all the previous 42 generations of that lineage. And it was a whoosh, right through the body. So to me, she was practical, positive, radical, and took such responsibility to teach. So let's talk about Buddha. The regular Buddha that we think of. There are many Buddhas. But the original Buddha, as we know, has a lot of legend in his history. So I invite you, as we explore this, to consider what are the similarities between perhaps his life, or more importantly, his teachings, and the teachings of the way shower Jesus. Let's just get curious. So he lived from 563 to 483 BC, before Jesus was born. He was born to the rulers of the Shakya clan, which is why he is given the last name of Shakyamuni, a wealthy clan. He was from a very wealthy family. And the legend talks about his mother had an immaculate conception. Sound familiar? This one was when a white elephant entered her right side and she became pregnant. Pretty unusual, right? And then when she birthed him, she did so standing up, holding herself against a tree. He came out the right side of her and took 7 steps as an infant. All pretty miraculous, right? Legend, legend. So he was then taken to a fortune teller in the palace who said, this child will be a great ruler or a great teacher of spiritual mystery. His father wanted him to be a ruler. So he was given the name Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his goal. And because his father wanted him to be a great ruler, he didn't want him exposed to any suffering, to anything that might call him out of the palace to be a religious ascetic. As he grew into adulthood, he took 4 chariot rides out of the palace. In the first trip out, he saw an old person. In the second trip out, he saw a sick person. In the next trip out, he saw a corpse. And in his fourth trip out, he saw a wandering ascetic, a mendicant, a person who was a religious teacher and traveling around begging for his well-being. And he was so inspired by that at the age of 29, he left his wife, he left his child, he left the palace, and he went out into the world as a very, very strong ascetic. He drank very little of anything. He ate very little of anything. And he did this for a number of years, really focusing on the suffering he had seen, the suffering of the world. And because of his really strict practices, he nearly died. And as he's seemingly dying, a woman comes and brings him a bowl of rice. He eats it and he begins to recover. And he has this recognition that his actions have been extreme and have not provided him with the peace, the understanding that he was looking for. So he developed what is called the middle way. And this is where we get to the place that I really invite you to notice. Are there similarities to the faiths you're familiar with? Are there similarities to unity? So he sat under a tree all night long and he experienced enlightenment. Think about the word enlightenment. He experienced nirvana, the sense, the beingness of no suffering. And he understood how he got there and what that meant. And so he began to teach that. And pretty soon he had many, many disciples. And he lived to be 80. So he had something like 45 years of traveling and teaching. So the first sermon he gave was recorded, and it is called The Four Noble Truths. So we're going to go through that. There is the truth of suffering, the truth of what causes suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that leads to the end of that suffering. So you see how he begins to break this down into real practical means. And it is believed that, yes, these things can be taught, but what's ultimately important is that each practitioner have the experience of it. So that means being embodied, present to each moment. So suffering comes from when we have unguarded sensory contact to craving and clinging to impermanent things. What does that mean? We do it all the time. We may even be doing it in this moment. I'm aware my feet are cold. I'm beginning to suffer because my feet are cold. And I don't want my feet to be cold. So I'm clinging to an attachment of warm feet. That's a small example. So this craving keeps us caught up in samsara. And that is the cycle of birth, death, rebirth, just going over and over and over again through the experience of suffering. So birth is suffering. We know that. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering, even if it's just cold feet. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering, like warm feet. So this all happens with delight and lust and attachment to those things, seeking delight here, lusting for it there, craving for something that we don't have, which is a way of disbecoming, not becoming. So the truth of the cessation, the ending of suffering, is the fading away and the letting go of that craving. So in this moment, I'm aware that I'm not necessarily desiring warm feet. They're just my feet. The giving up and the relinquishing of that craving, having freedom from it, being liberated from it. So I invite all of us to be aware of, gosh, how often in each and every day do we have a craving? And do we get attached to that craving? And how much of our mental, emotional energy gets caught in that? So the way leading out of suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. It has 8 different pieces to it. They are not done in an order, nor are they done separately. We combine them in our practices. The first is right view. The next is right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So life always has suffering. It can be subtle, it can be extreme. Even when things seem good, we always feel an undercurrent of anxiety or uncertainty. It seems to be part of human nature. And again, the cause of this suffering is ignorance and craving. And the big cause of this is a belief that we are separate, independent, solid, I, me, myself. And we spend a lot of energy making that seem real. This painful and futile struggle to maintain the delusion of ego is known as samsara, or again, getting caught in that birth, death, rebirth cycle of pain. One of the tenets of Buddhism is everything is impermanent, including our suffering, including our thoughts, including our emotions. If you think about it for just a moment, you are experiencing something different now than a moment ago, than the moment before that, than yesterday, than last year. And it will be different in another moment. It's always shifting and changing. So when we recognize that, we can remove our attachment to it being different, because it's going to be different. We can remove our attachment to it staying the same when we have a moment of pleasure. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can do that. So the path includes living ethically, practicing meditation, and developing wisdom. We can do the same thing Buddha did. That's what he taught everybody. Not that he was special, but that he discovered a way that always is there for everyone. So, right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Ethical conduct. Ethical conduct is built on the idea, the reality of universal love and compassion. We hear that word a lot, compassion, with Buddhism. And the compassion is for self and for all others. No judgment of the others for whom we're going to feel compassion. It is the moving forward toward happiness, peacefulness, love, and compassion for all. Not just a few, not just our favorites. So compassion is of the heart. Wisdom is of the mind. And compassion includes charity, kindness, love, tolerance. And wisdom is the intellectual side. So it's ways of working with the mind. And as we know in Buddhism, we often refer to the monkey mind because it so describes how our mind is all over the place, curious about everything, picking that up, throwing that up. You know, monkeys are adorable, but boy, they can also cause trouble. So ethical conduct is based on that love and compassion, and it includes 3 of the 8: right speech, right action, right livelihood. So right speech is no gossip. I had a student of mine ask me recently, why is it wrong to gossip? Think about it for a moment. She said, it's so fun. You know, we meet in the halls of the school, teachers and I, and we sat and we talk about this person and that. It can be pretty addictive. But think for a second, if you say something about someone and it may or may not be true, but it influences the person, the listener, as to how they see that person, right? At a minimum. So right speech is no lying, to not use any harsh, rude, malicious, impolite, and abusive language. Think for a moment, how often do we hear that abusive language? And have we used it ourselves? It means not speaking carelessly. It means thinking about what we're saying before we say it. And if we don't know what to say, to use noble silence. In this moment, we had a moment of silence. How comfortable is it? Sometimes we have to get used to it. So right action is moral, honorable, and peaceful. We are taught not to destroy life, not to steal, and not to be dishonest in our dealings, and not to engage in illegitimate sexual intercourse. And we should help others find a peaceful and honorable life. So one of the things that was part of my training was, if we see somebody doing some of this, we have an obligation to address that. Right livelihood. So we should abstain from making our living through anything that brings harm to another, such as trading in arms and lethal weapons, intoxicating drinks or poisons, cheating, killing animals. Live by a profession that is honorable, blameless, and innocent of harm to others. So right speech, right action, and right livelihood are ethical conduct. It promotes a harmonious life for us individually, and those around us. Next is mental discipline. And there are 3 parts to that from the 8 Noble Path: right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So right effort is that energetic will to prevent evil and unwholesome states of mind coming up in our own mind, to get rid of evil and unwholesome states that have already risen in our mind. Think for a moment back on our monkey mind. Don't those thoughts just come? You know, a negative thought about the neighbor making too much noise when I'm trying to do something. That's not serving the neighbor nor I. So getting rid of those that are already there, those thoughts, and then to produce good thoughts, peaceful thoughts, and then to develop and bring to perfection the good and wholesome states of mind already there. So in my monkey mind right now, I've got the negative, I've got the positive, I've got the neutral going on all at once. It's a busy place, this mind. So right mindfulness is being diligently aware, mindful, and attentive in regard to all the activities of the body, sensations, emotions, activities of the mind, ideas, thoughts, conceptions, and things. So we know that being mindful, the term that Thich Nhat Hanh brought and used so much here, means to be aware of what's going on inside oneself and around oneself. So I invite us to have a mindful moment right now and be aware of our bodies, of our breath, of our mind, of our heart, of our environment. All we did was slow down. That's all we did. So breathing exercises are a very common practice for helping us to get in touch with our mind and our body and our environment. We should be aware of all forms of feelings and sensations, pleasant, feeling good, or neutral. How do we practice becoming aware of those without judgment about them? Soon as we make a judgment about them, aren't we clinging to them in some way? And then we are cultivating desire, and we go on that path of suffering. Whereas if we are simply aware of them, knowing they're impermanent and they're passing, we don't have to get caught in suffering. So, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, right livelihood, right action, right speech, right thought, right understanding. Two different kinds of understanding. One is knowledge of data and what things mean. The other is a deeper understanding of what is real. So with these practices, we come to a deeper understanding of what is real. Let's pause and think for a moment. What is real? Let's come back to that belief that we get caught up in, that we are separate, that we are an individual me. When we get caught in that, we lose sight of our unity. We lose sight of we're all connected. All of us individuals are connected. All peoples are connected. All beings are connected. Bobby did a lovely meditation with a bug, a dog, people, leaves, pointing out, allowing us to have the experience of being fully connected with those. When we pause for a moment and we imagine what it's like to be a leaf falling, that's a beautiful experience. Now I invite us to have another experience that we may have some judgment about. What if we are that person on the corner with a sign asking for help? Notice the change in your body and mind and heart. Allow ourselves to find the compassion there. This compassion has a opening heart sensation, doesn't it? And let us try another quick experiment. If we're willing, allow someone to come to mind and heart that we don't care for. Someone we either know personally or we just know of. And again, notice what happens in our body, in our mind, in our heart. Where is the compassion? There is still a seed of compassion. And when we find that seed, and we focus on that seed of compassion, what happens? It sprouts. It grows. And at some point, we have this recognition there is no difference between myself and that person, ultimately. So if I can engage in all of these right and noble actions, my life is more peaceful. I have greater awareness of what is real. I have greater compassion for myself and others. And when we demonstrate that, even just through kindness, doesn't that make a difference to someone's life, potentially, including that person we don't like? That person that we may even have a repulsion to? There's a practice as we travel through life and we notice others to just simply say silently to them, for them, I see you. I see you. And think for a moment, how do we feel when someone truly sees us? Not just our foibles, our mistakes, our grungy habits, but they see us as love and compassion. They see the divinity within us from their own divinity. That's what we're talking about, right? That's when we get to language of unity, the recognition that all is divine. The practices of coming back again and again and again to our own divinity, resting in that, being that, sharing that. So I'm going to share a piece of music with a Buddhism piece to it and invite you to just notice what comes up for you. I'm going to mention a couple of things about unity and invite you to just explore what comes to your mind and heart. Remember our 12 powers and how they can be useful to us in our spiritual path. Faith, strength, wisdom, love, power, imagination, understanding, will, order, zeal, release, and life. And our 5 principles. There's only one presence and one power active as the universe and in my life, God the good. Our essence is of God, therefore we are inherently good. This God essence was fully expressed in Jesus, the way shower. We are co-creators with God, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. Through prayer and meditation, we align our heart mind with God. Through thoughts, words, and actions, we live the truth we know. Do you see how they begin to align with these noble truths? So again, unity is a positive, practical faith of radical self-responsibility. Does that sound onerous or inviting? So we will go into our donation of love and light at this time by taking a breath together and becoming fully aware of the love and the light that we are. Aware of this divinity. And if someone comes to your mind and heart now, allow that and allow yourself to experience compassion and have an understanding of their love and light, which is the same. It's the same love and light. And if it serves you, I invite you in this moment to look at each other, recognize the love and the light in each person.